I never thought I'd be sitting here writing this, but I need to get it off my chest. I made the biggest mistake of my life, and it cost me everything: my marriage, my savings, and my self-respect. I'm telling my story not for sympathy, but as a warning about how quickly things can fall apart when you make the wrong choices. I'm Sarah, 26, and until recently, I owned a small bakery with my friend Jade. I met my husband Alex when I was 22, and he was 29. He worked in corporate finance, and I was immediately drawn to his intelligence and work ethic. We dated for a year before getting married, and everything was perfect for the first 2 years. The trouble started at a company dinner. Alex had asked me to come along, since it was their annual celebration. I remember spending hours getting ready, wanting to look perfect in my new burgundy dress. When we arrived, I was amazed by how fancy everything was. Alex introduced me to his co-workers, and everyone was lovely. That's when I first met him, Marcus, Alex's department head. Marcus seemed normal enough at first. He shook my hand, made some small talk, and moved on. I didn't think anything of it at the time. In fact, I barely remembered meeting him until he showed up at my bakery 3 weeks later. He came in with his teenage daughter, saying she loved baked goods, and someone at the office had mentioned my shop. It seemed reasonable enough. Alex had always been proud of my business and talked about it at work. Marcus asked if we could keep an eye on his daughter while he attended a quick meeting nearby. I agreed, thinking nothing of it. His daughter was sweet, and we gave her some fresh cookies while she waited. When Marcus returned, he was extremely grateful and insisted on paying extra for our time. I refused, saying it was no trouble. Looking back, I should have seen the signs when he lingered longer than necessary, asking about the bakery and my background. 2 weeks later, he returned with his daughter again. This time, he stayed throughout their visit. Jade pulled me aside later and said something felt off about his behavior. I brushed it off, thinking she was reading too much into it. I didn't even mention it to Alex because it seemed so insignificant. But then Marcus started showing up regularly, sometimes without his daughter. He'd bring coffee or pastries from other shops, claiming he wanted to research the competition for my benefit. Each visit got longer, and our conversations became more personal. I told myself it was just friendly business advice from my husband's boss, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One day, he came in just before closing and finally said what he'd been thinking. He told me he hadn't stopped thinking about me since the company dinner, that he'd been finding excuses to visit me. I should have shut it down immediately. I should have told Alex. Instead, I let myself get pulled into his attention. The visits continued. We'd talk for hours while Jade gave me worried looks. He'd bring small gifts, and I started looking forward to seeing him. It was like I was living in a bubble, pretending what I was doing wasn't wrong. Even when he invited me to his house that first time, I went, telling myself it was just to see his home renovation project he'd been talking about. That's where I crossed the line I can never uncross. After it happened, I felt sick with guilt. I stopped going to the bakery for weeks, avoided his calls, and could barely look Alex in the eye. I convinced myself that if I just pretended it never happened, everything would be fine. I was so wrong. I had no idea Alex knew everything. How could I have been so blind? He's always been smart. It's one of the things I fell in love with. But I never imagined he'd been watching me fall apart our marriage piece by piece. It happened on a regular Tuesday. I was at the bakery when I checked my bank account and felt my world stop. My savings, every penny I'd worked for, was gone. I rushed home, knowing only one person had access to my accounts. Alex was the one who handled all our finances. He'd taught me about saving, helped me manage my business accounts, and I'd trusted him completely. When Alex came home that evening, I confronted him about the missing money. What happened next still feels surreal. He looked at me with such disgust, such hatred. I didn't even recognize him. Then he said something that broke me. Marrying you was my life's biggest mistake. That's when I learned he'd known about Marcus all along. He told me how he'd gotten suspicious when I first mentioned Marcus visiting the bakery. Apparently, Marcus and Alex had a rocky work relationship, so Marcus suddenly visiting his wife's bakery raised red flags. Alex hired someone to watch me, and they documented everything. The visits, the gifts, that day at Marcus's house. "Did you really think you could fool me?" he asked. I stood there, unable to speak. He'd known for weeks but waited, watching me dig myself deeper. When I asked why he didn't confront me sooner, his answer was simple. He wanted me to feel secure before he took everything away. Then came the divorce papers already signed by him. He told me to leave the house immediately. I had nowhere to go, no money, and my best friend's savings were tied up in accounts Alex managed too. But he didn't care. He said I wasn't even worth him risking his job by confronting Marcus at work. I ended up staying with Jade. She was furious about her money being caught in the middle of my mess, but she didn't throw me out. I tried to fight for my money legally, but lawyers cost money I didn't have. My parents, when they found out, couldn't even look at me. They told me to let it go and live with my choices. The divorce moved quickly since we had no kids. I got minimal alimony, barely enough to survive on. Alex kept everything else. He'd planned it perfectly, making sure I'd have nothing when he was done. The worst part wasn't losing my money or my marriage, it was realizing how completely I'd been played. Marcus never contacted me after everything fell apart. The whole city seemed to know what happened, and I finally understood the truth. I'd been nothing but a pawn in a power play between Marcus and Alex. Their office drama played out differently than I expected. Since Marcus wasn't an owner, just a department head, he couldn't really harm Alex's career. They still worked together, maintaining a professional relationship like nothing happened. It makes me sick thinking about it. They're both fine while I lost everything. The divorce was finalized last week. 2.5 years of marriage gone. Some days I can't believe how stupid I was. The comments from people who know about my story have been brutal, but I deserve them. They've actually pushed me to work on myself, even though it's been hard. I'm focusing on rebuilding my bakery business now. I owe Jade too much money to think about anything else. She reminds me about it often, and I don't blame her. She's still angry, but she's the only one who hasn't completely turned their back on me. My parents still won't talk to me. They say they need time to process how their daughter could do something like this. Sometimes I think about how different my life would be if I'd just told Alex about Marcus's first visit, or if I'd listened to Jade's warnings. One bad choice led to another, and before I knew it, I'd destroyed everything good in my life. I'm not writing this for sympathy. I don't deserve any. I'm writing it because maybe someone else will read this and think twice before making the same mistakes. It's easy to tell yourself that innocent flirting doesn't mean anything, that you're in control of the situation. But you're not. I learned that the hard way. Today, I'm living in Jade's spare room, working double shifts at the bakery, trying to pay back what I owe. My wedding ring is gone, sold to cover some bills. The dreams I had of growing my business, starting a family, they all disappeared the moment I chose to follow Marcus to his house that day. The hardest part is knowing there's no one to blame but myself. Marcus might have pursued me, but I was the one who was married. I was the one who broke my vows. Alex's revenge might seem harsh, but I can't say I didn't deserve it. All I can do now is try to rebuild some kind of life from the ashes of my mistakes. Some people tell me I'll find love again, that I'll move past this. Maybe they're right. But right now, all I can focus on is getting through each day, working to pay back Jade, and trying to live with the person I see in the mirror. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that trust, once broken, is like shattered glass. You can try to piece it back together, but it will never be the same. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too. Your support means a lot. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or story ideas, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next story.